Hello, all you fine, beautiful people. I'm back here once again with another video, and today I am going to be doing a tier ranking for the Genesis albums. If you're new to the channel, I've done a few of these before with Pink Floyd, Uriah Heep, Yes, Megadeth. After this one, I'm going to be looking at expanding into a lot of different bands after this, so it might be prog with the next one. It might be more hard rock, classic rock, a lot of different ideas I'm kind of floating up in the air. But looking at this, I've heard Genesis, I've come into them within the last few years. So I thought it'd be a great time to kind of step back and do a tier ranking. So let's get into this and see what I think of these albums. So here we are, bringing up the mighty tier maker. Let's see how this goes. So the categories for me are masterpiece. That's like cream of the crop. Underneath that is almost there. That's kind of like it's almost there. It's like 90% for that category. I like most of it. That's like your more than half the album kind of category where it's like 70-80% of it you like. Average, that's like 50-60% of the album you like a couple songs, very self-explanatory, only like two songs. And do not recommend, that's the one for where you bring an album and you're like, it's probably either something that's very unlike the rest of the catalog or it's just weak, and it's really only for completionists. I think I might actually rename that in the future as only for completionists' sake. But anyway, let's get into this. Number one, from Genesis to Revelations, I have to put this in the do not recommend. This is virtually the only Genesis album where it falls into this category of there's not a lot there. You can tell it's a band, it's their debut. It's very poppy sounding, kind of, but it's an album I really do not go back to whenever I go to discover Genesis. Even the band has been very critical of it. There's times where I listen to it, I'm like, you know, it's not bad. But as a whole, throughout their discography, this would be one I'd probably put in the do not recommend. I think there are people out there that would find stuff on there they like. It is a very stripped back Genesis before they really discovered the progressive rock element to their band, and it's kind of a shame because you have Peter Gabriel, Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks, Anthony Phillips on this, and I think it's an all right debut, but there's just nothing there that really keeps me. On to the next album, Trespass. The last one to feature Anthony Phillips. I'll probably put it here. Uh, what is it? Knife's Edges on this, Stagnation's on this, The Knife's on this, White Mountain. There's a lot to really like here. You can really tell it's a difference in sound. It very much is a different feel to the whole album and to the whole Genesis as a band. The last to feature Anthony Phillips just kind of felt like it was always going to be kind of the Peter Banks, where I think their directions they wanted to go were different. And it's very interesting looking at Yes and then looking at Genesis and how similar their kind of career paths are at the beginning, where you do the first couple records, then you have a band members switch, you bring someone in, and it completely opens up your band. But I'll put it in like most of it. It is really a good record. I'll heavily suggest if you're into early prog, definitely check it out. It's one of those great records, and I like the album cover here. It has a very unique, different, kind of brings almost that how would I put it? Kind of that striking album image that would become one of Genesis's fortes going forward. On to the next album, which is going to be Nursery Crime. Oh, where did I put Nursery Crime? It's a really good record. I'll give it that. Uh, I'm going to put it. Do I put it there? Ooh, it's really tempting to put this album here, but I'm going to put it almost there. I'm going to put it there. Uh, the musical box, Fountain of Salmacis. The Fountain of Salmacis or Salmachus, however it's pronounced, Seven Stones, Harold the Barrel. Harold the Barrel is on this. Return of the Giant Hogweed's on this. Absolutely love it. I think Phil Collins, Steve Hackett joined the band, and it completely opens them up musically. I think it is a step up from Trespass. Great, great track. Looking at some of the other stuff on here, Harlequin, there's some great moments on this record. I think it really deserves to be rated very highly. It felt like this was the start of the peak Genesis going forward, and Phil Collins on drums, Steve Hackett on guitar. Add that to Tony Banks's keyboard work. Add that to a Mike Rutherford's bass and 12-string work as well, and Peter Gabriel vocal. This is a great record. On to the next album, Foxtrot. This is one of those albums where I'm going to put this right up here. I think it's bookended. I think these two albums are bookended fantastically. Where you get on this one, you get the musical box and the Fountain of Salmacis or Salmachus, however it's pronounced. And then on this one, you get Watcher of the Sky and you get Supper's Ready, which is the big 20-minute epic that is virtually amazing to just listen to. The one problem, though, I find with Supper's Ready, I really have to be in the mood to listen to it. It's one of those where it feels like a long song, but there's so much going on where it's like I have to sit down and really focus on it. Peter Gabriel's vocals are amazing. Steve Hackett's guitar playing, Phil Collins drumming, Apocalypse and 9/8, I believe, is from this track. Just absolutely sublime. You get Tony Banks on this as well. Just really great. Timetables on this, get them out by Friday. Can Utility and the Coastliners on here, Horizons, which is kind of an instrumental that leads into Supper's Ready, but just a fantastic record. Like, looking at what Genesis was doing by this point, to think you went within that 72, within 3 years, you went from doing this album, from Genesis to Revelations, to doing Foxtrot, is sublime. Next on the list is Selling England by the Pound. I'm going to put Selling England by the Pound. Do I put it? Yeah, I'm going to put it there ahead of Foxtrot. I think it is a step up from Foxtrot. It's a very great concept album. Or at least I believe it's I believe it's concept album here. From the great musical year in 1973. You look at the albums released in 73, you got Selling England by the Pound, The Dark Side of the Moon, you got Tales from Topographic Oceans, you got Lark's Tongue and Aspic or Aspic by King Crimson that year. You get Aerosmith's debut, Billion Dollar Babies by Alice. Like, 73 was a fantastic year. It's almost like it was the pinnacle that everything had kind of been working towards. It starts off with Dancing with the Moonlit Night. I Know What You Like in Your Wardrobe's the next one. Firth of Fifth is after that. More Fool Me after that. The Battle of Epping Forest, which I think is criminally underrated. After the ordeal, then you get the cinema show Isle of Plenty. There isn't a weak track on this album. I really believe that this album is, for me at least, top tier Genesis. And I think it works absolutely fantastic. It's a great record. Like, these two are phenomenal. On to the next album, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Ooh, where to put this? I know there are people I know that absolutely love The Lamb. And for good reason. I think it has its moments. I'm just trying to. Oh, where did I put The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? Oh, do I put it there? I'm going to put it there. I think there are people that are absolutely going to say I am wrong. And I know that. But looking at it, songs like The Carpet Crawlers off of here. Uh, oh, what's on this? Fly on the Windshield is on here, which is a great song. Yeah, really enjoying Carpet Crawlers, Fly on the Windshield. Uh, In the Cage, I think, is fantastic. Back in NYC is all right. The Chamber of 32 Doors, I love that. Lily White Lilith. The Waiting Room. Anyway, Here Comes the Supernatural Anesthetist. The Lamia and Silent Sorrows and Empty Boats. It's a really good record. Like, that's one thing I'll say. Just because I don't call it a masterpiece, because I know a lot of people would rank this as maybe their favorite Genesis record. There is some moments where I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, could have trimmed that down a little bit or made it a little bit more tight, but I think putting it here, even in Almost There, it's a damn good record. Like, I'm not saying anything in there sucks. Uh, After this, you lose Peter Gabriel. He leaves the band. This was an album that was very divisive on the band. And Peter Gabriel leaves, goes solo. And then in the midst, they were auditioning tons of singers. And then finally, Phil said, well, why don't I try singing some of this? And it really becomes what Genesis would be known for going forward. The start of the Phil Collins era, some would say the successful part, where you could say this is their artistic vision kind of part. Well, without Genesis Revelations, those 5 albums are very much them finding their artistic freedom. This era is more Genesis finding their commercial freedom. And this might, a lot of people might not agree with me on this, but A Trick of the Tail is an absolute masterpiece. One of my favorite Genesis record. I might shock a few people. I think this album is right here so far. I think this is my favorite Genesis record to this point. Top to bottom. Because I know it starts off with Dances on a Volcano. It ends with Los Endos, Entangled's on it, Squonk, Mad Mad Moon, Robbery, Assault, and Battery, one of their kind of caper songs like that they became known for. Ripples, A Trick of the Tail is fantastic. Los Endos. There's a video during one of the tours where Steve Hackett is still in the band, and you have Bill Bruford and Phil Collins doing percussive stuff on a tour, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic. But listening to this, it is a different feel from Genesis, like from the Gabriel. And it's one of those where it kind of feels like Phil is maybe more what Genesis needed at that time. And then on tour, you also get, I think, after a while, I think you get Chester Thompson on drums. but listening to this band, they are phenomenal. Uh, Tony Banks, going back to a lot of these Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford, Phil Collins, Steve Hackett, even as a four piece, they're formidable as a band. And there isn't anything on this album I don't like. I think it's an absolutely killer record, just fantastic. On to the next one, Wind and Wuthering. Where to put this record? Hmm. This is a hard one for me to place. I'm going to put Wind and Wuthering right here. I like it more than The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I think this is a very underrated album at times in the Yes, or not Yes, in the Genesis discography. I believe it starts with the 11th Earl of Mar, I believe is the start of this. Let's just bring up the track listing. Yeah, the 11th Earl of Mar, One for the Vine, which is an absolutely killer track. Your Own Special Way, What, Gorilla, All in a Mouse's House, Blood on the Rooftops, The Unquiet Slumber for the Sleepers, which is an instrumental that leads into in that quiet earth, and then Afterglow. This is a fantastic record. I think it, like I said, it is underrated. Uh, I love this era of Genesis as a four piece. These two albums to me are just as good, probably, as these two, or these two, or these two. Like, I always feel Genesis, like, you always have to kind of look at it as like a two piece band, but it's killer. Like, this era, most bands would kill to have this degree of success, of just great records. And it's a great 7 album run for Genesis. After this album, sadly, Steve Hackett leaves the band, and it leaves them in kind of this weird spot of what to do. Do you continue with or without a guitar player? How are we going to go about this? Um, and they decide, okay, where most prog bands by 78, you look at 78, there was some albums that people considered terrible, but looking back on them, I don't think they're as bad as people say. Is it maybe what people were expecting? No. 77, Pink Floyd released Animals. Yes released Going for the One, but 78, Yes is releasing Termato. Uh, Emerson, Lake and Palmer has Love Beach, which, quite honestly, for me, other than just a bad cover, I don't think the material on that album is as terrible as people say. That might be another great tier ranking to do of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. When it comes to, and then there was three, I kind of feel the same way about, and then there was three at times, as I feel about Wind and Wuthering. I'm gonna put, and then there was three. I like most of it. Down and Out's a good song. Undertow, Snowbound, Burning Rope, Deep in the Mother Lode, The Lady Lies, Follow You, Follow Me, which was their big hit. That one song, in Follow You, Follow Me for Mike Rutherford, pretty much led to this. I don't think Genesis survives without that hit. And I think it is probably one of the most important songs in Genesis's career is Follow You, Follow Me, because it proved there was a commercial side to Genesis. And probably the other song that would probably be most leading towards this would be Phil Collins in the Air Tonight. But yeah, I think that album, I like most of it. I think it is criminally underrated. I think it unfairly gets a bad rap because there is some killer stuff on here. And whether or not you like prog going into the 80s, I think you have to admit this is a really damn good record. On to the next one, Duke. Hmm, where to put Duke? Because there's part of me with Duke. It's a really hard album to really rate. Because there's part of it with me that, oh, where to put it? Because there's part of me that thinks it is different than all of this. Was that a bad thing? I'm gonna put Duke. Hmm. I'm gonna put Duke right there. I think Duke is a masterpiece. Uh, I know there's people that might not agree with me on that. I think Duke is a great record. Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, Man of Our Times, Misunderstanding, Heathaze, however it's pronounced, Turn It On Again, Alone Tonight, Cul-de-sac, Please Don't Ask, Duke's Travels, Duke Ends. I think that is one of my favorite Genesis albums. Definitely within the masterpiece. It's different. I know a lot of people that are very anti Duke, anti 80s Genesis. Pretty much they say once Steve Hackett left the band, it sucked. I don't agree because I think take Duke and put it on there. A song even like, oh, what is it? Turn It On Again. Listen to that song and it sounds so simple, but yet you look at what's going on, it's so complicated to play. And there is progressive elements to this era of Genesis. I think a lot of people just were at the time might have been unwilling to look at that. On to the next album. Oh boy. Maybe the most divisive album in Genesis catalog that they ever did. It's got to be Abacab. Where to put Abacab? I'm going to put Abacab. I'm going to put it here. I like a bunch of this record. Abacab, the opening track. Me and Sarah Jane, I like. Uh, Who Done It? I like that song as well. Man on the Corner, another record. I end up liking half this record. Uh, I do see the point people have with Dodo Lurker. I understand why. It's an album that I think at times gets unfairly because a lot of people would put it here as like terrible. I think it really is Genesis trying to discover a new way forward. I think it works for me at least. And quite honestly, it's not that bad of a record. On to the next album on the list, and this is other than oh, what is it? Other than Fall, this might be one of their biggest songs on this. Here it is, the self-titled, or as a lot of people like to call it, the Shapes album. This is yeah, Genesis. Where to put this? Hmm. Because this is really a difficult place to put this. I might be one of the few I'm gonna put this right here. I love this record. I love the first half of this record. Mama is a fantastic song. First time I heard it was in Grand Theft Auto 4. Just an absolutely killer song by Genesis. Then you get their biggest hit, I believe, as a band, That's All. Constantly played on classical rock radio. Just killer track. The whole Home by the Sea, Second Home by the Sea is killer. Illegal Alien, Taking It All Too Hard, Silver Rainbow, It's Gotta Get Better. The only track really on here I just don't care much for is just the job to do. I'm like, it's kind of that's the only weak point of the album. But I'm thinking if that's the only weak point of the album, it's really good. Like out of all these albums, think about it, 8 of them I'm saying are virtual masterpieces. You got the masterpieces, then you got that, then you got a couple that are I like a majority of them, but 8 of these, yeah, a lot of bands would kill to have a discography where they had that much good stuff on it. I think also during this era, Tony Banks, Mike Rutherford really shined. Uh, just some really interesting stuff to listen to. Just phenomenal. Now on to the next record, Invisible Touch. I have to say though, that's a really interesting album cover. I some might say after this, the album covers kind of went downhill. Like that's kind of a little cartoony. That's a little bit more like, oh, what's going on there? This one I don't mind as much, but yeah, where to put Invisible Touch? Hmm. This was a huge record for Genesis. Invisible Touch, Tonight, 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 Land of Confusion, Into Deep, Anything She Does, Domino, Throwing It All Away, The Brazilian. Do I put it there? Where do I put this? This is a really hard album to place because I wouldn't put it in their masterpiece. I probably don't put it here. It's between these 3 categories here. Let's see, how much of this album do I like? I definitely like Domino. I definitely like The Brazilian. I do like Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, and Too Deep. I'll probably put Invisible Touch right here. I think that's a good spot for it. I don't think it's average. I like a majority of this album. Just this is it's really hard once you get into this, like once you start really thinking about it. And this was Genesis probably commercially at their peak, at least in terms of hits. Then you come up to We Can't Dance, another number one, 1991. No Son of Mine, Jesus, He Knows Me, Driving the Last Spike, I Can't Dance, Never a Time, Dreaming While You Sleep, Tell Me Why, Living Forever, Hold My Heart, Way of the World, Since I Lost You, Fading Lights. I'm gonna say it's average. It might be the one of the weaker albums out of their 80s catalog. I don't like it as much as Abacab. I think by this point, you could really tell Genesis at that era had been kind of burning the candle at both ends with a Genesis and Phil Collins' solo career. But however, there is still a lot of really good stuff on here. Like it's just by this time, like even Driving Last Spike and Fading Lights are absolutely killer. There is some killer stuff on here. I don't think this album is as bad as a lot of people, because I know there's people that would have like some of these albums in here. I don't think it's terrible. I actually really enjoy this. I remember going through this for one of the Sunday live streams and listening to it, and I'm like, Genesis, for the most part, other than their first album, really doesn't have a terrible record listening to it. So that's where I'm going to put We Can't Dance. Still a heavily successful album, but just for me, by this point, I think it was kind of all filled out, really. I just was like, oh, okay, this is kind of felt more like it kind of ran its course, but it's still really good. There's still some really, really good stuff on here. On to the final album Genesis released, Calling All Stations. Phil Collins is gone. Ray Wilson is on this album. Nick DiFirgilio's on drums on Afternoon, Alien Afternoon. Kind of had a couple different drummers come in, trying to replace Phil. I see what Mike and Tony were kind of going after. They were trying to recapture and then there was three, like, okay, well, Phil leaves, we'll just bring in another guy, he'll fill the shoes. There is some good stuff on here. I'm not going to say Calling All Stations is terrible. It really isn't a terrible album at all. Like, there's stuff on here I really like. Alien Afternoon, I do like that song. Let's see what's on here. Calling All Stations, Congo, Shipwrecked, Alien Afternoon, Not About Us. If That's What You Need, The Divining Line, Uncertain Weather, Small Talk, There Must Be Some Other Way, One Man's Fool. I'm gonna say it. I'm probably gonna put it here. Yeah, I think that's about right. So that's my tier ranking for Genesis. I just put, yeah. So in the masterpiece category, we got A Trick of the Tail, Selling Alien by the Pound, Foxtrot and Duke. Almost There, you got Wind and Wuthering, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Nursery Crime, and the self-titled. In the Like Most of It category, you get, and then there was three, Trespass, Invisible Touch. In the average category, you get Abacab, We Can't Dance, and Calling All Stations. There's nothing in the like, only a couple songs, and there's one Do Not Recommend from Genesis to Revelations. That's pretty much just for completionists. I know some people, I'd be shocked if anybody had that in like masterpiece of Genesis. But anyway, that's my tier ranking there, guys. Tell me what you think down below. I'd love to know what your guys' rankings are. I know my rankings probably differ from a vast majority of people who love Genesis or love a lot of different other bands. I just thought it'd be something fun to come on here and just kind of rate where I thought these albums go. The great thing is I can do this in probably 2 or 3 more years and it would be completely different. Or it might be the same. Who knows? But anyway, that's my thoughts and opinions. Like I said, I'd love to know what you guys think. Comment down below. Tell me where I'm right. Tell me where I'm wrong. Rip it apart as much as you want. But once again, I have to say thank you guys so much for watching. That really does mean a lot. Peace.